It was such a big goal, such an impossible undertaking, such a daunting task. I had to become the person to get it done.
Hey YouTube, I am so excited to share this interview with you guys today. I'm talking to a man named Erden Eruc, and I'm wearing my nautical dress for a reason. Erden traveled the entire globe all by himself, all with his own power. So he completed the first solo human-powered circumnavigation. He has rowed across 3 oceans all by himself, which is just one of the many Guinness Book of World Records that he has broken. So really excited to talk to him today and share his story. He's not well known. So I've been doing a lot of research about your journey and your many records, world records that you've broken. So I think I know some of the answers, but I'm going to ask you the questions anyway. So how did you decide to start on your solo human-powered circumnavigation of the world?
I used to be in information technology world, and while working in a software development lab in Silver Spring, Maryland, I used to take breaks in front of this world map hanging on the wall in our laboratory, and this was a special map with the Pacific in the middle. America's on the right. I would just trace my finger from east coast of US all the way to Turkey, where I'm from, and even gave it a name, Journey Home. That's how it all started, and then just got bigger from there.
So what was your original plan? Was just to go from the US to Turkey, I'm guessing rowing?
I was going to do more overland travel, except for a crossing of the Bering Straits, and that was the original plan. Just do a land bridge over Bering Straits, somehow figure out how to get across that, kayaking or rowing. Wasn't certain at the time. I was just tracing fingers, wondering if I could do this by human power. And once I asked, what if, then, yeah, I started asking myself how, and those are problem-solving questions, and I'm trained as an engineer. I'm wired that way, so it became a quiet obsession.
Wow. When did you come here to the US?
I came to the US in 1986 for graduate studies, and this episode in front of the map hanging on the wall happened in 1997.
Okay, so 97, and you set out in 2007.
For the circumnavigation, I set out in 2007, yes. I did not feel ready, and I vacillated. I had a lot of excuses, of course. I had a mortgage to pay. I had a career. Where was I going to find the funding? How was I going to afford the time? Daydreaming never stopped, though. I kept reading books because whenever I shared this idea with others, I would get questions like, have you done anything like that before? Has this been done before? And so I learned quickly that not everybody needed to know. And one of the books that I read was Ultimate High by Göran Kropp. It told the story of Göran Kropp cycling from Stockholm to Nepal in 1996 to climb Everest solo. And once I read that, then I had found a kindred spirit. I said, well, here's a way to do this, and what if I could find this man and learn from him too? Göran came to Seattle for a presentation the summer of 2001. And when he came to do his presentation, before the audience was let in, we were already inside chatting him up. And when I shared with him what I wanted to do, his first 2 questions to me were, when are you starting? Do you have sponsors? And of course, I threw my hands up at both questions. Those are the tough questions the right people ask. And then we met again in Ouray, Colorado for an ice climbing festival. He was there, I was there. And he asked me, haven't you started yet? I said, well, by then September 11 had happened. I said, well, is the world a safe place? Should I even do this?
Right.
And then he told me that he would be moving to Issaquah, just east of Seattle, where I live. And we decided that we would meet. And September of 2002, he came out of nowhere, having climbed Everest yet again with his then fiance, Renata. And he said, I'm in the area, let's go climbing. And so we did on that fateful day, September 30th of 2002. The lesson that I took that day, the shock and horror of it all, just having to live through that experience was something that I never thought I would. But of course, playing risky sports, it is to be expected, and we do everything to avoid such an outcome. So when he died and he was laying there and I could do nothing to bring him back, it basically became clear that life is short. I have to do this. And after all the evacuation was done and Göran was taken care of, I sat across the table with my then fiance Nancy, and I said, I have to do this now. We had met Göran together. She had read the book, and the idea that I should start my journey did not even create any hesitation. She said, yeah, you have to, you must. And we didn't look back after that. We just made a decision. The commitment was there. We were going to start this no matter what. Sponsors could catch up, media could follow. I just had to lead the way. And I cashed out my 401k accounts, and we just committed. And on the way back from Göran's funeral, on the plane, I drew the world map on a piece of paper, the proverbial envelope, the back of the envelope, and marked the highest summits on each continent. And I said, I'm going to reach these by human power, as had Göran Everest. So leaving out Antarctica, I said, this is the 6 Summits Project, and that's what I'm going to do. The first summit to go climb was Mount McKinley, within reach, with the least amount of expense and complications. So accident happened September. I drew the map in November, and I was bicycling out of Seattle with studded tires and trailer full of climbing gear behind my bicycle. February 1st, I started bicycling due north through icy, snowy roads of British Columbia and Yukon all the way to Alaska. Before I started bicycling, people were asking me, have you bicycled that far before?
Right.
You don't need to know. I don't need to answer that question. I just said, if I bicycle 50 miles a day, I'll be there mid-April in Anchorage. I got to Anchorage April 11th. So
wow.
2 friends met me just south of the mountain near Petersville. We hiked in the length of the Kahiltna Glacier using snowshoes and sleds. So everything that was on my trailer either got on my back on in a backpack or on the sled. And we had 2 weeks of food supply with us, and we used up 2 weeks to get to base camp. 2 other friends flew in with additional supplies to Kahiltna base camp, and then we climbed the mountain. We stood on the mountain. We started walking 1st of May of 2003, and we stood on the mountain top 29th of May.
Oh my gosh.
We got it done.
That is a long journey. This
Sorry?
was well before your circumnavigation. So this was you kind of building up to that, starting your 6 Summits project.
Yes. So then I decided that it was time to gain experience on the oceans, because those blue bits on the circumnavigation I had to cross by human power. My research led me to Jason Lewis, who had already started his circumnavigation, and he would just take breaks, go home, work, save money, go back on it. And he was just on this thing forever. This has been going. This had been going on 97 onward. So he was already an example that was out there, and he had a special boat that was pedal driven.
Yes.
With a propeller mechanism, and that's how he got around. And then I also found out about the Ocean Rowing Society based out of London, and they had a bunch of used boats that were standard, designed to spec, that were survivable on the oceans, purpose-built. So it was easier for me to buy a used boat than to start from scratch. So I contacted them, and ocean rowing became the way to do this. And to gain experience, I rowed across the Atlantic Ocean from Canary Islands to Guadeloupe in 92 days. That became my practice row. And once I felt ready, that was spring of 2006 that I rowed the Atlantic. And 2007, July, I launched from Bodega Bay, California on my circumnavigation.
I can't even imagine what you did. Like I can't even imagine going through that.
What was your best part of that entire journey?
I think the best part of the circumnavigation is the realization that the journey kept providing. Whenever I arrived at a far shore in a yellow rowboat, people needed to know the story. That it didn't matter whether they were villagers on the coast of Papua New Guinea or people in Australia or in Africa or in Venezuela. It didn't matter wherever I reached land. People were circling me and wanting to know the story, and the help that I needed just materialized out of nowhere. So I had the confidence that I could actually untie and get across this ocean, that I would find the help that I needed. I had that confidence, that faith in humanity, and that was the magic of the journey. And then didn't change when I was bicycling across land or walking across Papua New Guinea, or kayaking. It was always the same. People wanted to know why I was on the road, why I was doing this journey, and I could share. And that made it a special experience. That I think was the best takeaway. And also, it contrasted to my existence in the city. So in the city, after having done all of this, set 14 Guinness World Records, I came off the journey that had been my compass, my rudder, had focused all my energies and resources into getting it done, was all of a sudden gone.
Right.
And I had this big hollow to fill. And when I waved my hands and say, hey, look what I did. I have all these records. Do you want me to tell you about this? I didn't get the response that I had hoped. So media coverage was meager. Speaking engagements were not happening. I had a huge budget deficit. It turned out to be a $500,000 project to get it all done. Half of that came out of our own family budget with Nancy. And so I felt the responsibility to become whole again, and it wasn't happening. That led to frustration. I basically started feeling like, I don't belong in the city anymore. So I am a changed person, and I need to go demonstrate mastery yet again out there in the oceans and doing my thing. But I had run out of money. I couldn't go, so I felt trapped. And that feeling of frustration created a big dark cloud over my head, and it was a very dark episode after the journey. So yeah, that.
How did you get out of that?
Well, it took time. It took help from Nancy. She was very worried about my mental health and my degree of frustration and anger. So I had to resolve all of that and basically get physical again. Started working out regularly and refocus my energies into what else I could do. By the time I was done with the journey, Mount McKinley was done in 2003 May. During the circumnavigation, I climbed Kosciuszko with Nancy in April of 2010. And then in June of 2011, I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa with my then 79-year-old father and Nancy again, and a dozen friends who came to be with me. And so 3 of the summits were done, and I was dashing to the finish line on the circumnavigation, skipping Everest, Elbrus, and Aconcagua because we just did not have the funds. 2008, 2010 financial crisis just made sponsorship search impossible. And we were bleeding money whenever I moved. I couldn't even leave my boat and come home. We were still going to pay for the boat to be stored somewhere, right? And it had to be transported back. So I couldn't quit either. Quitting was not an option, financially and mentally also, because, Outside Magazine was telling me, well, we'll write an article about you when you finish your circumnavigation. That was so frustrating. And I had become the first person to have rowed 3 oceans by the time I got to Madagascar, and they didn't want to write an article about that. They said, well, I was halfway around the world, and they weren't going to write about it. Wait until I finished the circumnavigation. Well, they eventually did a feature article. Good on them, but that was such a frustrating relationship. And so it just needs to be said that these big undertakings sometimes isolate one. So for so long, I'm out of sight, out of mind, toiling in my own journey, that it becomes difficult to communicate. And to keep the focus on this journey is very difficult. I have to struggle keeping my focus on this journey, let alone others. So I think another big lesson that I drew from this journey was that it was such a big goal, such an impossible undertaking, such a daunting task that I had to become the person to get it done.
Right.
I didn't know at the beginning whether it could be done. Clearly, I had to get out there and put my mind and body into this. I had to become the person who could establish 14 Guinness New World Records and historic firsts, and become the first person to have rowed the 3 oceans, and become the first person to have done the first solo circumnavigation around the world by human power, and a dozen more records. So it was no easy task.
No. I guess
It was a growing process.
what about the worst part of or hardest? I mean, sounds like even after was extremely hard, but during the journey, was it dealing with, water spouts and just, or like what was the hardest part?
I think the hardest part is the loneliness. I don't necessarily resent being alone. I am comfortably, totally fine being by myself. I also knew that although I was by myself, I was not alone. I had people worrying about me, caring about me, and willing to reach out and help and whatever. But I had that responsibility on my shoulders that this was up to me to push forward. Boredom is a big challenge out there on the ocean. And the mind expands to fill the void. We don't have the stimulation that we have in the city. In the city, you're always distracted, trying to focus, avoiding distractions and stimulation. Out there was just lack of it. And it was a totally different experience. And there I was existing and had to focus on the moment, but the mind would race. I would deal with the past. I should have said this, I should have punched them. And then I would plan the future. Just what's going to happen next? Where do I go climb next? What is the next to do? I should send an email to this person, that person, planning the future. And then I would see a bird. I would see this fish. I would hear this knocking sound on the boat. And then I would come back to the moment. And so it was always this back and forth. And I had to control my thoughts a lot. out there. Best way to achieve that was to do multiplication table. I found out people ask me whether I meditated. Well, not really, and not in the sense that I would be this wiser person in the end, but I had to basically reel in these thoughts that were rattling in my head, let alone these things would just not stop. So I would start with 1 times 1 equals 1, 1 times 2 equals 2, just keep going. I never got past 4 times 1, but that was a task. So I just had to give my mind a task to focus on and just cut through all that stuff and cleave it apart so that it fell apart, right? And so that was one method I found that worked for me.
I can't, that's incredible. Like when I'm, on the treadmill for 30 minutes, I have to have music. If I don't have music, oh my God, I'll go nuts. Even with the music, I'm like, skip the song, this is taking forever. Like I can't imagine being alone at sea, alone, no one to talk to, with your own thoughts. That must have been kind of maddening.
I had recorded books that were really effective while rowing, but then if I didn't consciously hear the sentence, echo the sentence, register the sentence, move on to the next sentence, that was an exercise. It was an intentional exercise to listen to these recorded books. It would become white noise quickly. And I would just lose, and I would have to rewind and go back to where I was, start over. So even listening to these books became a challenge sometimes.
Oh my gosh. What about any moment that you wanted to quit?
Well, there were frustrating moments. As I said before, quitting was not an option. Whenever I was cerebral enough to look at where I was and how much I still had to go, the bottom line always became, well, I can't quit. Just got to keep going. But there were difficult moments, clearly. What do we do? For example, on the Pacific Ocean, after I launched, it became a strong La Nina year that season. Instead of an El Nino, I had a La Nina conditions. La Nina conditions make the equatorial winds blow stronger. So the northeast trades and southeast trades blow harder than normal. Then whenever I tried to get to the equator, I would come south and southeast winds would pop me back north. I just could not cross the equator until very late. So instead of crossing the equator and going to Australia as I had intended and expecting northwest monsoons, I found none of the northwest monsoons, and they were basically pushed back and ironed out. And I ended up going west, ever westerly. I ended up north of Papua New Guinea. So that's why that became a record duration at sea, 312 days on my rowboat, basically stuck out there. I just could not leave my boat.
One point where you went around in circles for like 16 days, right?
Right. Was it 13? I don't know now. That was when I was attempting to cross the countercurrent. So I would come southwest using the northeasterlies, and before I could get to the southeasterly wind regime further south and the south equatorial current south of me, there was the countercurrent to cross in between. So these northeast, southeast winds and then the easterly countercurrent were the three vectors acting on my boat, trapping me. So I just tried to break through that. When I realized I couldn't go south, I wanted to go back north, and then the northeast winds would trap me in the countercurrent. So eventually I kept looking for a break, and I had enough communications capability on my boat that I could actually look for forecasts just north of me, just south of me, 3 days forward, to try to rally my strength and endurance to row for 3 days to just break out in one direction or the other. I ended up breaking north once again and heading due west eventually.
Were you tired all the time?
Not not physically. I did get enough rest. One has to sleep 8 hours a day on the water. I'm not racing. I am living out there, though my record non-stop awake is 43 hours on the final approach to Cameron, Louisiana at the end, when I was mixing with oil structures and platforms out there. I didn't want to have an accident. I did make a point of resting all other times. So unless I am near shore and the boat needs to be delivered to a certain destination, then I can rest when the boat is going in the direction I want. I have time to rest. If the boat is not going in the direction that I want, then I can either fight that physically or deploy drogues or para-anchor. That's a big parachute in the water that slows the boat's drift and the conditions, and it actually serves to turn the bow into the waves so that big waves coming would not roll the boat. The boat would meet it head on and then just pop over it, and then the waves would run, the boat would stay. So those kinds of measures one takes to slow the adverse effects of the conditions.
You had like some sort of beacon or something in case there was an emergency, right?
True. I had an Argos beacon. These are typically used by commercial fishermen to track where the vessels are. And I had one of those. And my location was broadcast. And we shared our location, my location. And I could, there was an emergency selector on that beacon that I could ask for help if I needed it. I also had the satellite phone. I used the satellite phone as a modem, and I could, through a serial cable, I had a little handheld device, and I could tap out messages. And my blog entries were done through that as well. Nowadays, we have better communication devices, still Iridium-based, but I use what's called an Iridium Go, and that serves as a little modem and has a bit higher connection baud rate. And so it's easier to communicate nowadays.
What was like the most dangerous moment, or maybe a moment where you're like, I hope I don't die right now?
The most worried time I had was when I was crossing Great Barrier Reef. I approached at around 7 p.m. one night to this half-mile wide gap that was indicated on the charts. And before approaching the Great Barrier Reef, I had studied these reefs are ribbon reefs that run for miles with little gaps in between them. And I wanted to enter through various passages, and I had a dozen of them marked. And then after that, depending on which way the current was running or the winds were blowing, I could run northwest, southwest, and then I basically had figured out multiple paths branching out from each entry. And when I approached, I hit one that I had not studied, but I had to go through. I had no choice. I approached it, and with my luck, I had ebb tide. The tide was flowing out. It would not allow me in, so I got bounced back. So now I was stuck on the outside of the ribbon reef with the current running northwest. The ribbon reef was running northwest. So the current was running with the reef on the outside of the reef, and the wind was from the northeast. So basically it was pushing me squarely onto this ribbon reef. And all night I had to point the bow into the waves and keep rowing just to keep my distance away from the rocks while the current carried me to the other end of this ribbon reef. It was quite a risky time period. It lasted all night long. I could hear the waves breaking on the rocks, on the reefs, like a distant waterfall. And it was never too far away. And if the wind had picked up another 2 knots, it would have pushed me toward it. It remained just strong enough that I could deal with it and stay off the rocks. And I didn't have dinner. I pulled out some protein bars. I had these like tea bags. I had coffee bags, right? And I would just tear those coffee bags. I didn't have time to boil water. I just would tear the coffee bag, chew the grinds, drink water over it, eat my protein bar, and drink water over it, keep going. And it was that kind of a stressful period that lasted until the next morning. So about 12 hours of this. By the time I got to the other side, I had ebb tide again. It pushed me out, kept me away from the rocks, and I slept half an hour, another half an hour, setting double alarms. And then when second time I overslept, I woke up 45 minutes later and the boat was rushing right through the gap. And I looked around, water was boiling everywhere. I could see rocks underneath and the water was rushing over all this. And I came close, and in the chart plotter, I saw this big green blob ahead of me that indicated big reef. I looked, I couldn't see it. I had to steer away from that, just basically row like crazy, try to avoid it. And I looked under, constantly worried, where are the rocks? Of course, if I damaged my boat, then it would be a very difficult time period. I'd have to transition to life raft, whatever else I had to do to deal with it. And that was a very difficult time. And people ask me, what was the most dangerous thing you did? Were you worried about sharks? Did the whales attack your boat? And all these silly questions. Well, no. My time on the ocean was actually very predictable, very manageable. And my most dangerous time during the journey was the time I was bicycling on the highways. And bicycling on the shoulder of a highway, not seeing what's coming from behind me. All these 60-mile-an-hour missiles coming at me, each one with my name on them, and possibly a distracted driver on the cell phone texting, whatever else they're doing, drinking coffee, spill it on themselves, and the next thing you know, they're looking down trying to sort out the spilled coffee, and there I am in their way. So, I mean, that's a very likely scenario, and that happens with every single passing vehicle, and that's not fun. So that's the most dangerous thing that I do, cycling on the highways. Wow. Otherwise, nature, I can anticipate the problems. I can prepare for them properly. I can take them on one step at a time. I can foresee it. I can anticipate it. I can prepare for it. I can deal with it. And I will say that nature is a good teacher. And very fair, and say, this is what it takes. You need to be this tall to do this, and I am this tall, therefore I need to grow up to meet that. But with humans, it's not as easy. They can throw curveballs at me. Border crossings could be challenging. You know, I never got robbed or challenged in that way. Physical challenge violence is always around the corner. You need to know that, not become a victim, but at the same time, there's only so much you can do to avoid it. So therefore, one needs to rely on the goodwill that is out there in bounty. So that was, I think, that sense of vulnerability stays with such a traveler, human-powered traveler. And that sense of vulnerability also leads to more goodwill being extended to me. So seeing how vulnerable I am, people take me in, right? So that's a two-way street. And so as vulnerable as I may be, and wanting to practice the horse sense, right? So you run first, then look. That's a learned experience. You hide first, then look. So you set your tent behind the bushes on the roadside, not be visible, because you have to hide first, then look. You have to wait until if you're in the roads of Mozambique, where people are using the pathways, because after the Civil War, there were so many anti-personnel landmines strewn in the countryside. People don't use the bush, they use the actual roads to walk. So day in, day out, there will be people, especially women and girls, carrying water to their homes. And there will be people on the roads walking, and I couldn't break away. I had to wait for a period where there would be no people visible along the band back and forth, and I would just dive behind the bush, get away from the road as much as possible, use no headlamps, set up my tent, be quiet as possible, just disappear, and then come out in the morning. So that was a pattern, and that had to be done that way. So it takes learning, it takes behavior modification to survive it all. Yeah.
What about how did your wife handle the trip and the separation, and you as well?
She actually was a champ from the get-go. We made the decision to take this on together. She was the one who said, you must, you will. We made choices together to downsize our lifestyle, to sell our home, to move farther away to a smaller place so that we could actually release half the funds tied into this condo that we had with a lake view in Seattle. So all of those choices had to be made. A second car had to be sold, expenses reduced. So all those financial choices were made together as well. But over time, as long as she knew what was going on, she was fine. As long as I could inform her of what was going on, even the difficult periods, she was fine with that. She worried when she couldn't hear from me. And the mind has a way of assuming the worst. Yeah. And that, I think, is a difficult problem to handle. One of the episodes, for example, was when my Argus beacon threw out a bogus signal. They later said that it could happen when the receiving satellite would be just falling behind the horizon and the signal gets corrupted along the way. But they don't know if it's a rescue request from me or if it's a simple location indicating signal, location data. So with that corrupt data, they don't know, and they just peg it and say, keep monitoring. But then when they say keep monitoring, the operations center sends out this message saying, oh, we're monitoring, we don't know what's going on. Everybody be on alert. So now everybody, including the Ocean Rowing Society, Nancy, and the Coast Guard in Hawaii, Honolulu, were alerted to possible disaster. And Nancy had to stay up until she heard from me, reached out to her friends. They were going to hold an all-night vigil, giving her emotional support. And eventually she sent me these messages that came through on the satellite phone as text messages. And I said, why am I the last one to know what the hell is going on? So I picked up the phone, and instead of calling Nancy, I bypassed her because I knew that the satellite or the beacon would be sending messages to the operations center in Toulouse, France, Argos headquarters, and they would be alerting the Ocean Rowing Society. That was the chain of alerts. And I went straight to Ocean Rowing Society. I said, what's going on? What's up? And they were happy to hear my voice, obviously. And immediately they said, we'll call Honolulu. I got the Honolulu phone number from them too. I called them myself, the person in charge, officer on call, and Nancy as well, and just settled everybody down. I said, hey, all is well. I don't know what's going on, but don't worry. So she had to deal with those kinds of episodes too. The logistics, she became my go-to person. I learned along the way that I should ask how her day was before I asked her to do things for me. I called my satellite phone because that became a point of contention over time. So I was trained on that one. So yeah, she was the one that would do the logistics. When I got to the far shores, while I dealt with the logistics of my boat, she would be contacting people and finding out which logistics company, stevedore and company at that port, would be helping me, and where to send who would receive my bicycle and all the gear that had been packed ahead of time. When we got to Africa, she had it. And I was only halfway done with the journey. She came to Kilimanjaro, and that became a time when we had to make a decision. And do I stop or do I go? And I said, I can't stop. We're still bleeding money. The only way out of this is to reach the end. I have already bypassed Everest and Elbrus to save money. I'm going to skip Aconcagua as well. I'm going to dash to the finish line on the circumnavigation, and we need to endure this. She was saying, you may not be there when you get home, when you get to the finish line. So it was a big bargain, a big question mark, and we worked through that and made it to the finish line. And the last month, bicycling from Louisiana to Bodega Bay, she came and found me by car and just paced me with the car, took all the excess weight from me so I could freely simply bicycle rather than towing all this trailer and whatnot. And we could camp at night and catch up. And during that time, her mother was suffering from cancer and eventually hospice care. And as soon as I got to the finish line, Nancy flew the next day. And there I was trying to deal with media coverage and trying to tell the story, wondering about Nancy and her mom. I had to make a choice. That's just when the Aurora theater shooting had happened. Nobody was listening to anything I was about to say. And I said, this is meaningless. This is nonsense. I need to be with Nancy. So I pulled the plug on everything. I got on the plane. 48 hours after I got to the finish line, I was flying to chase down Nancy, and I got in. Mom said she had been going in and out of coma, and she came out, said, "Is that you?" Then noticed my voice, and there I was, that they were at their wits' end, trying to move her around in the house from one bench to the bed, whatever, and they needed my strength. And 24 hours after I got there, she was moved to the hospital, and 48 hours later, she was gone. So that became the point when it all resolved. Everything else nothing else mattered at that time with Nancy. It was all good. We were able to get back together, resolving all issues. Nothing else mattered. We were there. We were together. We were one and the same. So I think that unfortunate conclusion to my circumnavigation also became our salvation.
Right. Because she did stay with you till the end.
Yeah, yes.
Even though she was a little bit worn out and burnt out by it.
Yeah, I mean, 5 years, 11 days, that's a lot to ask from anyone.
Absolutely.
She was holding the fort. She was dealing with this, and we were just bleeding money everywhere. I didn't have the coverage. I didn't have the recognition. I didn't have the sponsors. I was just obsessed with this thing, and it had to get done in my mind. And of course, it only mattered to me after a while, and nobody else cared. And that's the difficulty with these long, drawn out challenges.
Wow. Yeah, so we were saying this wasn't cheap. It cost like $500,000, 200, or half of that was your guys' own money, and the other half came from where?
Donations and sponsors.
Wow.
And even with that, we were able to raise about $110,000 through our nonprofit Around and Over to help in educational projects. A good amount of that, about $95,000, was to this nonprofit in Turkey that helped boarding school students in primary education in rural Turkey. So, I mean, these kids were coming to school with minimal footwear and walking miles in snow to get to school and go back.
Wow.
To the villages for holidays, and they needed anything from pens and pencils and paper to footwear. I mean, so that was minimal amount of help that we could generate, and those were powered by donations as well.
Let's talk a little bit about you carried a stone with you your entire journey, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that?
That was a stone that I picked up from the little walkway that was under the climb air guitar. When Yoram fell, he bled out that path, and that stone was soaked in his blood. So I picked that up. It wasn't big, smaller than my palm, but it was him and represented him. His presence with me was important. And so I just took that with me all the way around. I still have it.
Do you still have your boat?
I still have the same boat. I am building a new one. I just started the process. I want to continue the Six Summits project. I want to row from California to mainland China. And if the boat build is complete before May, I would like to launch in May. It has to be in May to meet the seasonal demands, seasonal requirements, because typhoons can form on the western side of the Pacific. On my path to mainland China, I need to be off the water in April. So in the last 2 years, typhoons formed as early as February in the last stretch of the route that I'm going to cover. So long story short, this new rowboat has to be survivable even in typhoon conditions. And I am going to throw in a few new features into this rowboat that'll be more sturdy and more survivable than my existing boat.
And you have 3 more summits, right, to complete?
Correct. So Everest would be next on my to-do list. And then Elbrus, which is at the border of Russia and Georgia, and in the Caucasus. And then Aconcagua in South America. Yeah, those are the 3 that I would like to go climb by human power.
Is that a way to celebrate almost 60 years old?
I will be 60 this July, yes. I'm still fit. I can still keep up with the youth.
But I mean, I feel like that's so inspiring, and that more people should really realize that you can. I mean, you did the circumnavigation when you were in your 40s, right?
Yes, I started my circumnavigation journey in 2007. That would be age 46 when I started. So people ask me, do you have any regrets? Would you do it any differently? I say, yes, I do have regrets. I would have started earlier. I had so many excuses to not start. I would have found this path much earlier in my life if I had my choice today. So do not postpone the dreams, because I tell youth as well, I tell the kids, dreams are the fertile ground where our future is shaped, where our future takes root. So if we ignore and suppress our dreams, we shortchange ourselves. It doesn't matter how big a circumnavigation, a normal person would have said, nah, that's not possible. I'm not going to do that. You might get these fleeting thoughts, but then you're going to dismiss it, right? You're going to just set it aside and who's going to do that?
Yeah.
I don't have time for this. But I actually was the one to latch onto that and say, hey, that I can do. I will do this. So why not, right? And figure out how to get it done. So rather than making up excuses. One needs to find solutions. I actually like to define it as self-propelled rather than solo, because obviously I was not alone on the land phases. I would get into stores and buy stuff, and I would meet other people. But I moved the journey under my own power at all times. Even when I had to do the logistics and move the boat from place to place, I would go back to the same spot. If I went into the port, the crane would lift up my boat from the crane spot to the entrance to the port authority. I would walk and then bicycle from the gate onward. So every bit of it, I had to tag it end to end and stitch it together. And that was a requirement by Guinness, obviously. So, it does. Age does not hold me back, fortunately. I am still healthy. I'm able to perform, and I am going to take on this challenge even when I am 60 years old, still able to perform and establish new records. By the time I get to mainland China, I will have established a half dozen Guinness records, world records. So it'll be the first time the North Pacific will have been rowed mainland to mainland from North America to Asia. It will be, I hold the record for most days at sea, career total, 844 days solo. That will advance. I am 3 days short of the overall record for total days at sea. My career total stands at 934. The record belongs to Peter Bird, who was lost at sea on his 937th day, trying to row from Vladivostok to California back in, I think it was 96 again. So he was lost at sea, and I carried his logo on my rowboat. My last record, 15th Guinness World Record, was established but rowing with his son from Monterey Bay to Waikiki in the Great Pacific Race in 2016. So we had some tender moments there when Louis, his son, who was a toddler when Peter was lost, was trying to commune with the ocean and connect with his father, trying to understand what motivated him. And I just had to hold space for him to grieve and keep him safe and deliver him to his mother, and so that the mother didn't get a second phone call. And we established a new record on that one, 54 days, I think it was, if not 56, I can't remember now. Anyway, we set the course record for doubles rowing, classic design rowboats from Monterey to Waikiki. The previous record stood at 75. I don't know what they were doing being at sea for that long, but that was a good one. Well established.
It sounds like, your media coverage has picked up though over the years. I mean, you've had a documentary.
We are working on a documentary that is still in the works. We did a Kickstarter campaign, and our director has it now. He's working 80 hours for HBO doing miniseries and still trying to carve out time to get our documentary done. So when that'll get finished, I have no idea. But going forward, we also have a director in Turkey, actually, who picked up another. He's motivated to do a documentary and a multi-episode TV series about my upcoming journey. Cool. So he wants to do a documentary in Turkish, maybe the subtitles and such, it could be pushed out to the rest of the world. But he's got connections in China with CCTV, which is the official Chinese channel over there. And I think they're going to collaborate and do something more substantial. So going forward, I'm hopeful that it'll be better covered.
And you were telling me, those times that you had to really dig deep mentally, one of the things that helped you was like those multiplication tables. Is there anything else just for people? I think it's really inspiring to find out like how you got through that, because that's something we all, face, is those times where where do you go?
I think what I have to reflect. So this pandemic times is not any different than my time at sea, right? So we are all somewhat isolated in our homes, especially initially when there were the lockdowns going on and people started to lose hope. Is this ever going to end? So if we were to relate the two experiences, I think you can start with, well, this is not going to last forever. There's an end. At sea, I'm here by choice. I want to be here. At home, you can switch that. I'm not here by choice, but hey, I got all the time in the world. I was granted this time. It was a gift. I should take advantage. I have time for my family. I have time to improve myself. I have time to pursue certifications. So at sea, what did I do? I had recorded books. I felt like I had to listen to these, finish them. I had Spanish lessons and French. I have some French from my high school years. I reviewed those and I was trying to pick up Spanish as well. And I had books of these as also trying to teach myself and read in French to revive my French again. And I'm going to do more of this. So you can bet that I will be listening to Chinese lessons and reading up on Chinese, trying to come up with at least the basics of how to communicate in Chinese with local population as I travel through China. So those will be the kinds of goals I will set myself. So I am here by choice. It won't last forever. I have to improve myself, get new certifications, gain new knowledge, improve. So I am better than yesterday. And also I have to change everything into rewards. So if there was anything that I wanted on the vessel, that chocolate bar, the music, that can of sliced pineapple that was hiding in the recesses of my boat, anything that could be a reward, I used as a reward. So, but the child in me wanted everything right then and there. Right. The adult in me said, not yet, you have to earn it. So I delayed, I practiced delayed gratification. So if I wanted music, I said 2 more hours, you'll listen to it in the afternoon. I want that chocolate, you'll get it after 3 hours. You only get 2 chocolate bars a day, kind of thing. So it was always delayed. And I had small bottles of wine with me, 4 of those, and I spaced those out every 1,000 miles, right? So when the 1,000 miles rolled up, it was time to pop one. So that kind of rewarding performance became a habit. And daily, I never aimed for 3,000 miles down on the other side of the ocean. I always put an intermediate waypoint, and I said, today I'm going to reach there. And it was those daily goal setting that got me through multiple days end to end. So when you get there at the end of the day to that intermediate waypoint, I'd say, okay, I got where I wanted to be. I am now, I have achieved success for today. That's a good feeling. I take stock of that. I put it into my bank of internal strength, if you will. I taste success. I make success a habit in that way. And that success, the habit establishes itself. So it takes 21 days to establish new habits, right? So if you keep succeeding 21 days in a row, and you keep hitting the marks that you've set for yourself for 21 days, after a month, you're one with the environment, you are performing, and your body has adjusted. You are in better shape, and mentally you are winning, and darn it, it's not going in exactly the direction I want to go, but I am performing out here. This is the best that I can do. I am within margins of error that I had established for myself. Maybe I will set the new targets 35 miles ahead, not 30 anymore. And so I will perform better and I'll raise the bar. So one can't keep playing that game, delayed gratification and daily goal setting, and stay sane.
I love it.
Get a big task done. So basically bite-sized chunks gets it all done.
What, I feel like I had one more question. So is your, your success with your circumnavigation feel like you completed the world, so can you take on the world? Like, do you have that feeling of like, that you could do anything you wanted?
Within reason, yes.
I mean, within reason, what you did wasn't exactly
right. So yes, it is easy to dismiss our dreams as saying, hey, be realistic. That's one way that we shoot ourselves in the foot and not start. So yes, I agree. One should not dismiss these thoughts. Yes, I can do a lot. And since 2012, I have been somewhat inactive, except for the road to Hawaii with Louis Bird. It's time to get back on the saddle again. And this road to China, followed by ride to Tibet to climb Everest, onward to the Caucasus to climb Elbrus, Turkey, and onward to South America to climb Aconcagua. So it could end up being a second circumnavigation. I'm trying to sort out the finances on that one, get the boat built, all of it. And starting this as I am leaning on to age 60 is actually very meaningful. So it shows you that, hey, I still have what it takes. I still have the physical strength and stamina to take this on. Mentally, I am ready. I am not backing down on this. I know I can do this, assuming money is not an issue. We'll figure this out. I will need to get back out there. Because I'm not getting any younger, right?
No. And I'm guessing like after you guys bled a lot of money into that, have you been more financially stable in recent years? Were you able to like bounce back?
We actually were able to manage our finances well. We had some rental property that we were able to roll, and we were able to consolidate things. So we live without mortgage at this point. We own our place. We are comfortable. Nancy has steady work. I work as a sailing instructor. I don't bring as much money as I could or should. The pandemic did not help. We are stable. We are managing. We are not in need. But that $250,000 we spent, it hasn't been topped up. And there is not funding going forward either. I do have some help in designing the boat, and I'm getting in-kind help. But that's how we ended up spending $250,000 anyway. In the past, I always got some help, but not enough, and especially not cash. And that has remained a problem. If I can get the boat ready and load it up with food, I should be able to launch and get to China. I would have to limit my satellite phone calls to limit the expense of communications.
Do you have more sponsors now?
I do not.
What?
I do not. That's what I think as well. So I'm not going to allow myself to get frustrated, but I question meritocracy at some point.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I'm not famous. I have not received media coverage. So I am not a visible face. I'm not a known name. And that, for example, one of the potential sponsors that I had approached told me that if you have 5,000 followers on your Instagram account, we will consider it. And I now stand at 4,500, whatever. But the thing is, this is a chicken and egg problem. when a sponsor decides, yes, we are going to latch onto this project and we will share in the success, then they put their marketing dollars behind it. They put in advertising, they start hashtags, whatever their campaigns are doing to get the name out. And together with their brand, I become a brand as well. So without marketing dollars, without PR put behind this, I will always be alone. I will always be, as much as I can make myself heard, I will be known in my close circles, right? So to get this outside of my own circle of friends, this needs to be taken nationwide with PR campaigns by the sponsors. So unless I find a sponsor who is willing to promote this, we will always be in the same spot. And once I find a strong sponsor, then everybody else will latch on because they will now want to ride that wave to the other shores that I will row to. Until then, I am on my own, unfortunately.
So if you're not, I mean, obviously you're not getting the recognition, so you're not doing it for the recognition. So why are you doing it again? Why? The crazy journey aspect, right? What?
Well, the question, of course, the big why not is really the comeback on that one. And I also said a long while ago that I am going to do the Six Summits project. And as long as I'm alive, that's going to simmer and it's going to stay with me. And if I don't do it, I will be upset and I will think back and say I should have done it when I was young and I had the strength. And I don't want to be an old man looking back and say I could have done it, I didn't do it. So I think the answer really is I should do it while I have the ability.
Yes.
And not postpone it any further. As I said, do you have any regrets? I started too late. And that's just the corollary to the same argument. I still have the strength. I should do it. I shouldn't put it off because 10 years later, I'll look back and say, I had the strength. I didn't start. And I will be sorry. And I don't want to go to grave thinking I could have, I should have.